At Christmas dinner, Grandpa handed us each a $20,000 check. It's a prop, Mom laughed, from a closed account. My brother threw his in the fire. I was the only one who kept mine. When I went to the bank, the teller looked up and said, "Miss Hartley, this account shows an available balance of $873,000. How would you like to proceed with the deposit?" My hand started shaking so badly I had to set the check down on the marble counter. The teller, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a name tag that read Patricia, glanced around before leaning forward slightly. "Is everything all right?" I couldn't speak. I just stared at the check, at Grandpa's shaky signature in the corner, at the routing numbers that apparently led to an account everyone believed had been empty for 15 years. "I need to make a call," I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Patricia nodded and directed me to a private office where I sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than my car and tried to understand what was happening. My grandfather, William Hartley, had died 3 months ago at the age of 91. The funeral had been elaborate, held at the cathedral downtown, followed by a reception at the family estate in Meadowbrook Hills, where 200 people had gathered to pay respects to a man who'd built a commercial real estate empire from nothing. My mother, Victoria, had inherited the estate. My uncle Bernard got the company. My cousin Sloane received the vacation properties. My brother Tyler and I got nothing, which Mom explained was Grandpa's way of teaching us to make our own way in the world, just as he had. The Christmas gathering had been tense, as family events always were in the Hartley house. Mom had insisted on keeping up appearances, decorating the mansion like something out of a magazine spread, hiring caterers, making sure everything looked perfect for the relatives who'd flown in from both coasts. Tyler had shown up drunk, which wasn't unusual. He'd been spiraling since his divorce, spending his days trading cryptocurrency from his condo and his nights at clubs in the city, burning through the settlement money his ex-wife hadn't taken. I'd been quieter, watching everyone, trying to figure out why Grandpa had called me to his hospital room 2 days before he died and told me to remember that things aren't always what they seem. At the time, I thought he was confused, his mind wandering under the weight of medication. Now, sitting in this bank office, I wondered if he'd been more lucid than any of us realized. I called my apartment, even though I knew my roommate Brianna would be at work. I just needed to hear a familiar voice on the voicemail greeting, something to ground me in reality. Then I called the one person I thought might have answers. "Grandpa's lawyer," I said when Patricia returned. "Douglas Rothman. Is there any way to see if his name is associated with this account?" Patricia's expression shifted, becoming more professional, more guarded. "I can check the account history, but I'll need verification that you have legal authority to access that information. The check is made out to me." "The check, yes, but account details are different." She was protecting something, I could tell. I pulled out my phone and found Douglas Rothman's number, the one I'd saved after the will reading. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice carrying that smooth quality that probably cost $500 an hour. "Jessica, what a surprise. How are you managing?" "I'm at First National Bank," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "I deposited the check Grandpa gave me at Christmas, the one Mom said was from a closed account." The pause on the other end lasted too long. "I see. Mr. Rothman, the account isn't closed. There's nearly $1 million in it." Another pause. "I think we should meet. Are you free this afternoon?" "I'm free right now." "Give me an hour. My office." He hung up before I could respond. Patricia had been listening, not even pretending otherwise. "Mr. Rothman is the executor of the estate?" I nodded. "Then he'll be able to provide clarification. In the meantime, would you like me to process this deposit?" I thought about Tyler throwing his check into the fireplace, watching it curl and blacken while Mom sipped her champagne and told stories about Grandpa's supposed financial struggles in his final years. I thought about how she'd sold his watch collection last month, claiming the estate needed liquidity. "Yes," I said, "process it." The deposit receipt felt like evidence of something, though I wasn't sure what. I drove to Rothman's office in the financial district, parking my beat-up Toyota between a Mercedes and a Tesla, feeling like an imposter. The law firm occupied 3 floors of a glass tower, all modern art and expensive furniture. The receptionist, a young guy with perfect hair, told me Mr. Rothman was running late and offered me coffee from a machine that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I waited 40 minutes, watching lawyers in tailored suits move through the space like sharks in an aquarium. When Rothman finally appeared, he looked older than I remembered, more tired. "Jessica, thank you for your patience. Please, come in." His office had a view of the city skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows that made everything feel unreal. He gestured to a chair across from his desk and sat down heavily. "I'm going to be direct with you because your grandfather specifically instructed me to be, should this situation arise. He left you that check knowing exactly what would happen." "I don't understand." "Your mother was told the account was closed because that's what your grandfather wanted her to believe. The account has been active and growing for 30 years. It was originally set up as a trust for your father." That name, spoken aloud in this office, felt like a physical blow. My father had died when I was 6, a car accident on a business trip. I barely remembered him, just fragments of memories that might have been real or might have been constructed from photographs. Why would Grandpa hide this? Rothman leaned back in his chair, and I saw something in his expression that looked like pity. "Because your father's death wasn't an accident, Jessica, and your grandfather spent the last 25 years proving it." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the arms of the chair, my deposit receipt crumpling in my hand. "What are you talking about?" "Your grandfather hired investigators, forensic accountants, even retired FBI agents. He built a case, meticulously documented, that your father was murdered. The accident was staged." "That's insane! Who would want to kill my father?" Rothman opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder, the kind lawyers use for complex cases. He set it on the desk between us. "Your grandfather believed it was your mother." I stood up so fast the chair rolled backward. "That's disgusting! You're lying!" "I wish I were. Your grandfather wanted you to have access to this information when you were ready. He thought the check would be the test, the way to see if you were paying attention, if you were willing to look deeper than surface explanations." "My mother loved my father. She's never remarried. She keeps his picture on her nightstand." "She does," Rothman agreed, "and she's played the grieving widow perfectly for 25 years. But the evidence suggests otherwise. The question is whether you want to see it." I should have walked out. I should have told him he was insane, that he was dishonoring my grandfather's memory with conspiracy theories. Instead, I sat back down and said, "Show me." The folder contained copies of accident reports, insurance documents, financial records, and photographs. Rothman walked me through it piece by piece, his voice steady and clinical. My father, James Hartley, had been driving home from a business dinner when his car went off a bridge into the river. The official report said he'd been drinking, that he'd lost control on a curve. But the toxicology showed only 1 drink, not enough to impair. The brake lines had been examined superficially but not thoroughly. The insurance payout had been substantial, $2 million, which went directly to my mother. "This doesn't prove murder," I said, hearing the desperation in my voice. "It proves there were questions that weren't asked." Rothman flipped to another section. "This is where it gets more interesting. 3 months before your father's death, he filed for divorce. The papers were never served because he died first. His lawyer at the time retired and moved to Arizona, but your grandfather tracked him down. He confirmed that your father had discovered your mother was having an affair with your Uncle Bernard." The name hit me like ice water. Uncle Bernard, who now ran the company. Uncle Bernard who'd always been at family dinners, who'd given the eulogy at Grandpa's funeral, who'd hugged my mother and told her everything would be okay. "You're saying they killed him together?" "I'm saying that's what your grandfather believed. He couldn't prove it in a court of law, which is why he never went to the police, but he wanted you to know. He wanted someone in the family to know the truth." "Why me? Why not Tyler?" He thought Tyler was too much like your mother, too interested in the easy path. But you, he said you had your father's integrity. He thought you'd know what to do with this information. I looked at the folder, at 25 years of secrets and investigations and carefully hidden truths. What am I supposed to do with this? Even if it's true, it was decades ago. The case is cold. The case, yes, but the money isn't. Rothman pulled out another document. This account, the one you just deposited into, was funded by your father's life insurance initially, but your grandfather added to it over the years, specifically earmarking it for you. He also left instructions. If you choose to pursue this, to investigate further, you have resources. If you choose to walk away, the money is still yours, no strings attached. How generous, I said, bitterly. He drops this bomb and then gives me a choice? He gave you the truth. What you do with it is up to you. I left the office with the folder under my arm, feeling like I was carrying a live grenade. The drive back to my apartment took forever, traffic crawling, giving me too much time to think. Brianna was home when I arrived, cooking pasta in our tiny kitchen. She took one look at my face and turned off the stove. What happened? I told her everything, the words spilling out in a rush that probably didn't make sense. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from confusion to horror to something I couldn't quite read. "That's heavy," she finally said. "What are you going to do?" "I have no idea." "Do you believe it? That your mom could do something like that?" I thought about my mother, about her perfectly decorated house and her charity luncheons, and the way she always knew exactly what to say to make you feel small. I thought about how she'd smiled at Christmas when Grandpa handed out the checks, how she'd laughed and called them props, how she'd watched Tyler burn his without a flicker of concern. "I don't know," I said, "but I'm going to find out." The next morning, I called in sick to work. My job as a marketing coordinator at a tech startup wasn't exactly demanding, but it paid the bills and came with health insurance. Still, this felt more important. I started with the accident report, reading it carefully, looking for details I'd missed. My father's car had gone off the Riverside Bridge at 11:30 at night. No witnesses. The guardrail was old, hadn't been updated in years, and the investigation concluded it had simply failed under impact. But there was a note in the margin, handwritten, that said, "Brake fluid on road surface, source undetermined." I called the police department and asked about the investigating officer. The woman on the phone told me he'd retired in 2008 and passed away in 2019. Dead end. Next, I looked up the insurance company. The policy had been issued by Continental Life, a company that had been bought out and absorbed into a larger corporation years ago. I spent 2 hours on hold before reaching someone who told me records from that far back had been digitized but would require a formal request and proof of relationship. I submitted the request, knowing it would take weeks. Then I did something that felt dangerous. I called my Uncle Bernard. "Jessica, what a nice surprise," he said, his voice warm. "How are you holding up? I know the holidays can be tough without your grandfather." "I'm managing. Actually, I was hoping we could talk. Maybe grab coffee?" "Of course. I'm free tomorrow afternoon. How about Café Montrose? Say 3 o'clock?" "Perfect." I hung up and immediately felt like I'd made a mistake. But if I was going to do this, I needed to look these people in the eye, needed to see if I could spot the lie. Café Montrose was the kind of place where business deals happened over espresso, all dark wood and leather booths. Bernard was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth, looking exactly like what he was, a successful businessman in his late 50s, silver hair, expensive suit, confident smile. "Jessica, you look well," he said, standing to hug me. I let him, trying not to flinch. We ordered coffee, made small talk about the weather and the traffic. Then I leaned forward and said, "I wanted to ask you about my father. Something flickered in his expression, too quick to identify. James? That's going back a while. What about him? I've been thinking about him a lot since Grandpa died. I realize I don't know much about his life, about what he was like as a person. Mom doesn't really talk about him. Your mother loved him very much. I think it's still painful for her. You two were close, weren't you? You and Dad? We were brothers-in-law, colleagues. We got along well. Did you know he was planning to divorce Mom? The question landed like I'd hoped it would, creating a moment of absolute stillness. Bernard's coffee cup paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully. Where did you hear that? Does it matter? Is it true? Jessica, I don't think this is appropriate. Your father's been gone a long time. Whatever problems he and your mother might have had, they died with him. So it is true. Bernard's expression hardened. I think you should talk to your mother about this, not me. I'm talking to you because Grandpa left me some information, a lot of information, actually, about Dad's death, about the investigation, about what happened before. Your grandfather was a brilliant man, but in his final years he became somewhat paranoid. He saw conspiracies where there were none. Did he? Or did he see things clearly for the first time? Bernard stood up, pulling out his wallet and throwing cash on the table. I have a meeting. This was nice, Jessica, but I'd advise you to let the past stay in the past. Nothing good comes from digging up old graves. He left before I could respond, and I sat there watching him go, my heart pounding. His reaction told me everything. He was scared. That night, I went through the folder again, this time making notes, creating a timeline. 3 months before the accident, divorce papers filed. 2 months before, my father had a meeting with an accountant about separating assets. 1 month before, he'd changed his will, leaving everything to Tyler and me directly, cutting Mom out. Then the accident, and suddenly Mom was a widow with $2 million in insurance money and full control of Dad's estate since we were minors. The will change had never been finalized, still in draft form when he died. Within a year, Mom had started working closely with Bernard at the company. Within 2 years, there were rumors they were involved, though nothing public. By the time I was a teenager, they were inseparable at family events, though they'd never made it official, never lived together, maintaining the appearance of propriety. I pulled up old society photos online, searching for images of them together. There they were, at charity galas, at company events, always standing just a little too close, sharing looks that lasted a beat too long. How had I never seen it? The next day, I drove to Meadowbrook Hills, to the estate where I'd grown up. Mom was in the garden, directing landscapers on where to plant spring bulbs. She looked up when she heard my car, waving me over with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Darling, what a lovely surprise. I wasn't expecting you." "We need to talk, Mom." "Of course. Let's go inside." The house smelled like it always had, expensive candles and furniture polish. We sat in the living room where we'd opened presents on Christmas, where Grandpa had handed out those checks with a look on his face I now understood was satisfaction. "I deposited the check Grandpa gave me," I said without preamble. Mom's smile didn't waver. "Did you? That's sweet. I hope the bank was understanding when they explained the account was closed." "The account isn't closed, Mom. There's almost $1 million in it." Now the smile faded. "That's impossible." "Is it? Because Grandpa's lawyer confirmed it was real. He also gave me a folder full of information about Dad's death." Mom stood up, her movements sharp. "Douglas Rothman is a vulture. Your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly at the end, and Douglas took advantage of that to create drama." "Did Dad file for divorce before he died?" "Who told you that?" "Is it true?" She turned away from me, looking out the window at the perfectly manicured lawn. "Your father and I were going through a difficult time. Many marriages have rough patches." "Was it rough because he found out about you and Bernard?" The silence stretched so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold. Your grandfather poisoned you against me. That's what that folder is. That's what this money is. It's his final manipulation from beyond the grave. So you're not denying it. I'm not discussing my private life with you. You're my daughter, not my judge. Did you kill him? She spun around, her face twisted with something ugly. Get out. Did you kill my father so you could be with Bernard and take his money? Get out of my house right now, Jessica, or I'll call the police. Go ahead, call them. Let's talk about Dad's brake lines and the investigation that was never completed. Let's talk about how convenient the timing was. Mom walked to the door and held it open. You have no idea what you're talking about. You have no idea what kind of man your father really was, what I endured. Then tell me. No, you've made your choice. You've chosen to believe lies over your own mother, so leave and don't come back until you're ready to apologize. I left, but I wasn't going to apologize. If anything, her reaction confirmed what I'd suspected. She was guilty, maybe not of murder directly, but of something. The question was how to prove it. Back at my apartment, I found an email from Tyler with the subject line, "What the hell?" The message was short. Mom called, says you're accusing her of killing Dad. Have you lost your mind? I called him instead of responding to the email. He answered immediately, his voice sharp with anger. What are you doing, Jess? Did you know Dad filed for divorce before he died? So what? People file for divorce all the time. It doesn't mean anything. It means Mom had a motive. A motive for what? You think she's some kind of black widow? She's our mother. And Dad was her husband, but that didn't stop her from sleeping with Bernard. Tyler was quiet for a moment. You can't prove that. I don't have to prove it. I just have to look at them together. Haven't you ever noticed? Noticed what? That two people who've both lost someone might find comfort in each other? That's not a crime, Jess. And even if they are together, so what? Dad's been gone for 25 years. She's allowed to move on. What if she moved on before he died? You're reaching. You're seeing patterns where there aren't any because Grandpa filled your head with paranoid nonsense. The account wasn't nonsense. The money is real. Then enjoy it, Tyler snapped. Take your inheritance and your conspiracy theories and leave the rest of us alone. Some of us actually want to maintain a relationship with our family. He hung up, and I sat there feeling completely isolated. Everyone thought I was crazy, that I was manufacturing drama. But I knew what I'd seen in Bernard's face at the cafe, in Mom's reaction at the house. They were hiding something. I spent the next week digging deeper, using the resources Grandpa had left. I hired a private investigator, a retired cop named Linda Vasquez, who specialized in cold cases. I gave her everything from the folder and asked her to verify what she could, to look for new angles. This is solid work, she said after reviewing the materials. Your grandfather was thorough. But you're right that it's not enough for law enforcement. Too much time has passed. Too many witnesses are dead or unavailable. So what do I do? You build a case in the court of public opinion. You gather enough evidence that people start asking questions, that your mother and uncle have to answer for their actions, even if they can't be criminally charged. How do I do that? Linda smiled, and it wasn't kind. You find the weak link. Every conspiracy has one. Someone who's been carrying guilt, someone who wants to come clean. Over the next month, Linda worked her contacts while I worked mine. I reached out to everyone who'd been close to my father, starting with his old business partners. Most were retired or had moved on, but a few remembered him fondly. One, a man named Richard Caldwell, agreed to meet me for lunch. Your father was a good man, Richard said, stirring sugar into his coffee. Honest, which is rare in this business. His death was a shock to all of us. Did you know he and Mom were having problems? Richard hesitated. I knew something was off in the months before. He seemed distracted, worried. He mentioned once that he'd made a mistake in trusting someone. Did he say who? No, but I got the impression it was someone close to him. Bernard? I don't want to speak ill of anyone, but there were concerns about Bernard's management of certain accounts. Your father was looking into some discrepancies. What kind of discrepancies? Money that had been moved around in ways that didn't quite make sense. Your father thought Bernard might be embezzling, using company funds for personal investments. He was planning to confront him about it. This was new information, not in Grandpa's folder. Did he ever have that confrontation? Not that I know of. He died before he could. I thanked Richard and immediately called Linda. We need to look at the company finances from that year. If Bernard was stealing and Dad found out, that's motive. That's also something that would be very difficult to prove now. The company's changed hands, been restructured. Financial records from that far back might not exist. But we can try. We tried. Linda got a forensic accountant involved, someone who'd worked with the FBI on white-collar crime. He reviewed what records we could access, piecing together a picture of financial irregularities that had been smoothed over after my father's death. The amounts weren't huge, not enough to sink the company, but enough that Bernard could have worried about losing his position, his reputation. This gives him motive, the accountant, whose name was Paul, explained. If your father was about to expose him, Bernard had reasons to want him gone. Combined with the affair, you have two powerful motives. But still no proof of actual murder. No, but you're building a narrative. Sometimes that's all you can do. I started writing everything down, creating a document that laid out the timeline, the evidence, the questions that had never been answered. Linda read it and suggested I strengthen certain sections, remove speculation from others. It was becoming something real, something damaging. The question was what to do with it. That decision was made for me when I got a call from my mother's lawyer, not Rothman, but someone new.
Miss Hartley, my name is Jennifer Kessler. I represent your mother and estate matters. She's asked me to inform you that if you continue to spread libelous accusations about her, she will be forced to take legal action. The truth isn't libel. Unproven accusations are. You have no evidence of wrongdoing, but you're damaging her reputation in the community. She's prepared to file a defamation suit if you don't cease immediately. I hung up on her, my hands shaking with anger. They were trying to scare me into silence, which meant I was getting close to something that mattered. That night, I made a decision. I was going to tell the story publicly, consequences be damned. I started a blog, anonymous at first, laying out the facts of my father's death and the questions surrounding it. I didn't name names initially, just presented the evidence, the timeline, the inconsistencies. Within days, it had been shared hundreds of times. People loved a mystery, especially one involving wealthy families and potential murder. The local media picked it up, running stories about the cold case with headlines like, "Did investigators miss foul play in 1999 accident?" Suddenly, people were asking questions. The police department released a statement saying they'd reviewed the case and found no reason to reopen it. But that didn't stop the speculation. Mom called me, her voice shaking with rage. "You did this! You're destroying everything!" "I'm asking questions you should have answered 25 years ago." "I answered them then. I've answered them every day since. Your father's death was an accident, a horrible accident, and you're turning it into a circus." "If it was just an accident, why are you so afraid of people looking at it?" She hung up without answering. Bernard was next, showing up at my apartment unannounced. Brianna let him in before I could stop her, and suddenly he was standing in my living room, looking out of place among our secondhand furniture. "This needs to stop, Jessica. Get out. Not until you listen. Your grandfather was sick when he put together that folder. He was seeing things that weren't there, connecting dots that don't connect, and you're making it worse by spreading these stories. Then help me understand. Tell me the truth about you and Mom." "There's nothing to tell. We're colleagues, family. That's all we've ever been." "You're lying." "And you're naive. You think the world is simple.
that people are either good or evil. Your father wasn't a saint, Jessica. He had his own secrets, his own failures. But we all loved him, and his death broke us. What you're doing now is breaking us again." "Good," I said, surprising myself with the venom in my voice. "Maybe you deserve to be broken." Bernard's expression hardened into something I'd never seen before, something cold and calculating. "Be careful," he said quietly. "You're playing games you don't understand with people who have far more resources than you do. That money your grandfather left you, it won't last forever, but the damage you're doing to this family will." He left, and I stood there wondering if I'd just been threatened. The answer came 2 days later when I was fired from my job. The official reason was restructuring, but the timing was too convenient. I knew Bernard had connections in the tech world, knew he could have made a call, applied pressure. I was being punished for asking questions. But instead of scaring me into silence, it made me more determined. I used the severance pay and some of the money from Grandpa's account to hire a lawyer of my own, someone who could protect me if Mom followed through with her defamation threats. I also reached out to a journalist I'd been following, someone who specialized in investigative pieces about wealthy families and their secrets. Her name was Rachel Torres, and she was interested immediately. "This is exactly the kind of story I love," she said when we met. "The problem is we need something more concrete. Right now, it's all circumstantial." What would be concrete enough? A witness, someone who was there, who saw something, who knows something they haven't told anyone. Where do I find that? Rachel smiled. "That's the question, isn't it?"
But I already knew the answer, had known it since Linda mentioned finding the weak link. There was one person who'd been close to both my mother and Bernard, who'd worked at the company during the relevant time period, who'd retired quietly and seemingly disappeared from family events. My father's assistant, a woman named Dorothy Chen. Finding her took another week, but Linda finally tracked her to a retirement community in Florida. I bought a plane ticket that afternoon, not telling anyone where I was going. Dorothy was 78 now, living in a modest condo with a view of a golf course. She agreed to meet me after I explained who I was, though she seemed wary. "I wondered if someone would come eventually," she said, offering me tea in her small living room. "Your grandfather tried to reach me years ago, but I wasn't ready to talk. Are you ready now?" She was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the palm trees swaying in the breeze. Then she said something that changed everything. "I saw your mother at the office the night before your father died, going through his files, taking papers. I asked her what she was doing, and she told me she was helping with a project. But her hands were shaking, and she left quickly when she saw me watching. The next day, your father was dead. I've carried that image with me ever since, wondering if I should have said something, if those papers had something to do with what happened." "What kind of papers?" "I don't know, but I know she wasn't supposed to be there. Your father had told me earlier that week that he wanted all his files secured, that he was concerned about sensitive information being accessed. He specifically mentioned Bernard." "Did you tell the police this after the accident?" "I tried, but your mother was so grief-stricken, so devastated that I convinced myself I must have been wrong, that it must have been innocent. And Bernard made it clear that speaking about family matters publicly would be bad for everyone. He said it in a way that made me understand it wasn't a suggestion." "He threatened you?" "Not in so many words, but I understood. So I kept quiet, and I've felt guilty about it every single day since." "Would you be willing to tell this story publicly?" Dorothy looked at me with eyes that held 25 years of regret. "If it would help find the truth, yes. I'm old enough now that I don't care what happens to me, but that poor man deserves justice, even if it's just people knowing what really happened." I recorded her statement, had her sign an affidavit, and flew back home feeling like I finally had the peace I needed. Rachel Torres agreed. "This is enough to run with," she said.
It's first-hand testimony from a credible witness. Combined with everything else, it paints a picture that's hard to ignore. The article came out 3 weeks later, front page of the Sunday paper, with a headline that read, "Questions linger in 25-year-old death. New witness comes forward." It detailed everything: the affair, the embezzlement suspicions, the divorce papers, Dorothy's account of my mother going through files. It stopped short of accusing anyone directly of murder, but the implication was clear. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with discussion. Other news outlets picked up the story. Someone started a podcast about it. And through it all, my mother and Bernard stayed silent, their lawyers issuing terse statements about false accusations and malicious intent. But I noticed something else. People started distancing themselves from them. Charity boards quietly removed Mom from positions. Business partners began cutting ties with Bernard. The court of public opinion was rendering its verdict. Then, exactly 1 month after the article published, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Jessica?" The voice was male, older, shaking. "Yes?" "My name is Peter Wallace. I was the mechanic who examined your father's car after the accident. I've been reading about all this in the news, and I can't keep quiet anymore."
I need to tell someone what I found. My heart started racing. What did you find? The brake lines had been cut. Not all the way through, but enough that they'd fail eventually, probably when most needed, like going down a steep grade or around a sharp turn. I documented it in my notes, but when I tried to include it in the official report, I was told it was inconclusive, that the damage could have happened during the accident. But I know what I saw. Someone sabotaged that car. I could barely breathe. Why didn't you say something? I was young, scared of challenging the official narrative, and someone from the insurance company called me, suggested that making waves could be bad for my career. I took the hint and kept my mouth shut, but I've regretted it ever since, and now that the story's out there, I want the truth to be known. Would you talk to a journalist? I'll talk to whoever needs to hear it. I connected Peter with Rachel, and she verified his credentials, his employment at the garage that had handled the car, everything. 2 weeks later, she published a follow-up piece. New evidence suggests 1999 death was no accident. Mechanic claims brake tampering. This time, the police had to respond. They announced they were reopening the investigation, examining all available evidence with fresh eyes. It had been so long that criminal prosecution was unlikely, even if they found something, but the acknowledgement that there were legitimate questions was vindication. The real justice came in a different form. Bernard was forced out of the company he'd run for 20 years, the board deciding his continued presence was too controversial. He announced his retirement and disappeared from public life. Mom lost her position in society, the invitations drying up, friends becoming suddenly unavailable. The estate, which had been so important to her, felt like a prison she couldn't escape. Tyler finally called me, and this time his tone was different. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I thought you were crazy, but I've been reading everything, talking to people. I think you might be right. It doesn't feel like winning." "No," he agreed, "but it's the truth, and that matters." As for me, I found myself with almost $1 million, no job, and a story that had consumed my entire life for months. I started a foundation in my father's name, dedicated to supporting families dealing with suspicious deaths and helping them find answers. Linda Vasquez signed on as a consultant. Rachel Torres became a board member. We couldn't bring my father back, couldn't undo 25 years of lies and cover-ups, but we could help others find the truth, could be the voice for people who'd been silenced. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, I'd take out the photo I had of my father, one of the few I'd kept, and look at his smiling face. I'd tell him that I'd kept his memory alive, that I'd fought for him the way Grandpa had taught me, that his death hadn't been in vain, that the truth had finally come to light.
But even as I thought about closure and justice, there was one question that still haunted me, one piece of the puzzle I hadn't found. What had been in those papers my mother took from Dad's office the night before he died, and where were they now? I spent the next 6 months trying to move forward while that question gnawed at me. The foundation was keeping me busy, and we'd already helped 3 families get second looks at deaths that had been ruled accidental. The work felt meaningful, purposeful, like I was turning my pain into something useful. But late at night, I'd find myself thinking about those missing papers, about what Mom had taken from Dad's office that had been important enough to steal. The answer came from an unexpected source. Tyler called me on a Tuesday afternoon, his voice tight with something I couldn't identify. "Can you come over? I found something you need to see." He'd moved into a new condo downtown after selling his old place, trying to get his life together after the whole family implosion. When I arrived, he looked sober and serious, more focused than I'd seen him in years. "I've been cleaning out some boxes from Grandpa's house," he said, leading me to his dining room table.
Mom gave me a bunch of stuff she didn't want, said I could throw it away or keep it. I found this hidden in the back of a photo album. He handed me an envelope, yellowed with age, addressed to Grandpa in my father's handwriting. The postmark was dated 2 days before Dad died. "Have you read it?" Tyler shook his head. "I waited for you. This is your investigation, your thing. I'm just trying to help now." I opened the envelope carefully, pulling out several pages of handwritten notes. My father's handwriting, precise and neat, detailing financial irregularities he'd discovered at the company. Bernard had been moving money through shell corporations, skimming profits and using company funds for personal real estate investments. But that wasn't the worst part. The notes also detailed evidence that Mom had known about it, that she'd been helping Bernard cover his tracks, that they'd been working together to steal from the company while planning to frame someone else if they got caught. "I confronted Victoria about the affair," Dad wrote in one section. "She admitted everything, said she loved Bernard, that she'd made a mistake marrying me. She begged me not to go public with the financial information, said it would destroy the family. I told her I couldn't protect criminals, not even her. She cried, but I saw something in her eyes that scared me. I'm securing all my evidence in a safe deposit box at First National Bank, account number listed below. If anything happens to me, this needs to come to light." My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the pages. "He knew," I whispered. "He knew they were planning something." "There's more," Tyler said, pointing to the last page. It was a list of people Dad had sent copies of his evidence to, including his lawyer, his accountant, and Grandpa. But there was a note at the bottom. "Original documents to be secured immediately. V has been acting strangely, asking questions about my schedule. B called 3 times today about unrelated matters. I think they know I'm getting close." "They killed him," Tyler said, his voice breaking. "They actually did it." We sat there in silence for a long moment, the weight of final confirmation settling over us. Then I remembered something. The safe deposit box. Did Grandpa ever access it? Tyler pulled out another document from the pile. "I found a bank statement in the same album. Grandpa paid the fees on that box for 25 years. It's still active. We need to get into it." It took 2 weeks to establish legal authority to access Dad's safe deposit box. Rothman helped, filing the necessary paperwork, proving I was Dad's heir. The bank required documentation, proof of death, verification of identity. But finally, on a gray morning in March, Tyler and I stood in the vault at First National Bank while an attendant retrieved box number 847. Inside were the original documents Dad had referenced in his letter, preserved perfectly for a quarter century. Financial records showing systematic embezzlement totaling over $3 million. Emails between Mom and Bernard discussing how to hide the money, and most damning of all, a recording. Dad had apparently worn a wire during one of his final conversations with Bernard, something he must have done without telling anyone. The audio quality was decent enough, and the content was devastating. Bernard's voice, younger but recognizable. "If you go public with this, you destroy everything. The company, the family, your children's future. Is that what you want?" Dad's response, steady and firm.
I want honesty, I want integrity, and I want you out of this company before you steal more than you already have. You're making a mistake, James. You're forcing my hand. Is that a threat? It's a fact. People who cause problems sometimes find themselves in unfortunate situations. Accidents happen. There was more, another 10 minutes of conversation where Bernard tried to convince Dad to look the other way, to take a cut of the money, to be reasonable. Dad refused every time. The recording ended with Bernard saying, "You'll regret this. I promise you that." 2 days later, Dad was dead. Tyler and I listened to the recording 3 times. Then I called Rachel Torres.
She brought her editor, and they listened with expressions that grew darker with each passing minute. "This is it," Rachel said finally. "This is enough for criminal charges. The statute of limitations on murder doesn't run out, and this is conspiracy to commit murder caught on tape." Will it hold up in court? That's for prosecutors to decide, but it's pretty damning. Combined with everything else, the suspicious accident, the brake tampering, the financial motive, you've got a strong case. We turned everything over to the district attorney's office that afternoon. The prosecutor, a woman in her 40s named Sarah Kim, reviewed the materials with her team while Tyler and I waited in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and old files. 3 hours later, she emerged with an expression I couldn't read. "We're going to present this to a grand jury," she said. "Based on the totality of evidence, I believe we have enough for indictments." "For both of them?" "Your mother and your uncle, yes. The financial crimes are clear, and the murder conspiracy, while circumstantial in some ways, is supported by enough evidence that a jury should hear it." The indictments came down 2 weeks later. Mom and Bernard were arrested on the same day, separately, both of them looking shocked and pale in their mugshots that appeared on every news site. The trial was scheduled for 6 months out, giving both sides time to prepare. Mom's lawyer tried to get the recording thrown out, arguing it was obtained illegally since Dad hadn't told Bernard he was being recorded. But the judge ruled that in a one-party consent state, which ours was, Dad had every right to record his own conversations. The recording stood. As the trial date approached, I found myself dealing with complicated emotions. This was my mother, the woman who'd raised me, who'd packed my lunches and attended my school plays. But she was also someone who'd conspired to murder my father, who'd built her life on lies and stolen money. Brianna helped me process it all, listening to me talk through the contradictions. You can mourn who you thought she was while still holding her accountable for who she actually is, she said one night over pizza in our apartment. Those two things can coexist. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution laid out their case methodically: the affair, the embezzlement, the divorce papers, the recording, the brake tampering, the suspicious circumstances of the accident. Dorothy Chen testified about seeing Mom at the office. Peter Wallace explained the brake line damage in technical detail. I testified about Grandpa's investigation, about the folder, about the check that had started everything. The defense tried to create reasonable doubt, suggesting the embezzlement and murder were separate issues, that Dad's death really was an accident despite the suspicious elements, that the recording showed Bernard making vague threats but not actually planning murder. They painted Mom as a victim of circumstances, a woman who'd made mistakes in love but never in violence. Bernard's lawyer tried to throw Mom under the bus, suggesting if there was a conspiracy, she was the mastermind and Bernard was just following her lead. It was ugly, watching them turn on each other, watching 25 years of partnership dissolve in mutual accusations. The jury deliberated for 4 days. When they came back, they found Bernard guilty on all counts: embezzlement, conspiracy to commit murder, and murder. Mom was found guilty of embezzlement and conspiracy, but not murder itself. The distinction seemed technical to me, but the lawyers explained that the jury believed she'd known about the plan but hadn't been the one to tamper with the brakes. The sentencing came 2 months later. Bernard got 30 years to life, which, at his age, was essentially a death sentence. Mom got 20 years for the conspiracy and financial crimes. She'd be in her 70s when she got out, if she lived that long. I attended the sentencing, sitting in the back of the courtroom. When the judge asked if anyone wanted to make a statement, I stood up. My legs felt weak, but I made my way to the front. "Your Honor, members of the court, I want to say something about my father, I began, my voice shaking. James Hartley was an honest man who tried to do the right thing even when it cost him everything. He could have looked the other way, could have taken the easy path, but he chose integrity instead. He chose truth, and he died for it, murdered by people he loved and trusted. For 25 years, his name was whispered about, his death treated like a cautionary tale about drinking and driving, even though he wasn't drunk. My grandfather spent a quarter-century trying to clear his son's name, and I spent the last year finishing that work. This isn't just about punishing the guilty, it's about honoring a good man, about making sure his death meant something, about ensuring that truth matters, even when lies are more convenient. My father believed in accountability, in justice, in doing what's right, even when it's hard. I hope this court's decision today reflects those same values. I sat down, and the judge thanked me for my words. Then she addressed Mom and Bernard directly, talking about betrayal and greed and the destruction they'd caused. Mom cried, her makeup running, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Bernard stared straight ahead, his expression blank. When it was over, when they were led away in handcuffs, Tyler and I walked out of the courthouse together into bright sunshine that felt surreal after the darkness of the proceedings. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Hollow," I admitted. "Like we won, but everybody lost." "Yeah," he agreed. "But at least the truth is out there. At least people know what really happened." We drove to the cemetery where Dad was buried, a place I hadn't visited in years. His headstone was simple, just his name and dates and the words, "Beloved Father and Son." Someone, probably Grandpa, had kept it clean and maintained. I knelt down, brushing away some leaves. "We got them, Dad," I said quietly. "It took 25 years, but we got them. Grandpa started it, and I finished it. You can rest now." Tyler stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. We stayed there for a long time, the two of us, the children of a man who died for doing the right thing. Eventually, we left, driving back toward the city as the sun set behind us. My phone buzzed with messages from friends, from people at the foundation, from reporters wanting statements. I ignored them all, just focusing on the road ahead. That evening, I went through the boxes of Dad's things that had been returned after the trial, items that had been held as evidence. There were his business files, his personal papers, photographs I'd never seen. At the bottom of one box, I found a letter addressed to me and Tyler, written in Dad's handwriting. The date on it was the day he died. "My dear children," it read. "If you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and I hope it means the truth has finally come out. I want you to know that I loved you both more than anything, and everything I did was to give you a better world, one built on honesty rather than lies. I know you're too young to understand this now, but someday you'll be old enough to know that doing the right thing isn't always easy. Sometimes it costs you everything, but it's still worth doing. Character isn't what you do when it's convenient. It's what you do when it's hard. I hope I've taught you that through my actions, even if I won't be there to teach you in person. Be good people. Be honest people. Take care of each other. And know that wherever I am, I'm proud of you both. With all my love, Dad." I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Then I called Tyler and read it to him over the phone, both of us crying together, mourning the father we'd barely known, but who had loved us enough to die with integrity intact. The foundation continued its work, growing larger as more people heard our story and wanted to contribute.
We helped dozens of families find answers, shine light into dark corners, ask questions that deserved asking. I hired Linda full-time as our chief investigator. Rachel joined our board and helped us navigate media attention. We became something good, something meaningful, built on the foundation of tragedy, but reaching toward justice. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about Dad.
Mom in prison, about Bernard behind bars, about how their choices had destroyed so many lives, including their own. I'd wonder if they felt regret, if they understood the magnitude of what they'd done. I'd wonder if forgiveness was possible, or even desirable. But then, I'd remember Dad's letter, his words about character and integrity, and doing what's right, even when it's hard. And I'd know that I'd made the choice he would have wanted me to make. I'd chosen truth over comfort, justice over family loyalty, light over darkness. The money Grandpa left me, the account that had started this whole journey, went to fund the foundation. Every dollar that came from that family conspiracy now worked to help other families find truth. It felt right, turning something corrupt into something clean. A year after the trial, I visited the cemetery again. This time, I brought flowers and a copy of our foundation's annual report, showing all the cases we'd helped, all the families we'd supported. I placed both on Dad's grave. "We're doing good work in your name," I told him. "We're making a difference. I think you'd be proud." The wind rustled through the trees, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I felt something like peace. Not happiness, exactly, because too much had been lost for that, but peace, the knowledge that I'd honored my father's memory the best way I knew how. I'd fought for truth, demanded justice, and refused to let lies stand unchallenged. That's what he would have wanted. That's what Grandpa had wanted when he left me that check, knowing I was the one who'd keep it, who'd look deeper, who'd care enough to dig until I found the truth. As I walked back to my car, my phone rang. It was a woman whose husband had died in a suspicious workplace accident 5 years ago, calling because she'd heard about our foundation and needed help. I answered, listening to her story, taking notes, already thinking about how we could investigate, what questions needed asking, what truth needed hiding. This was my life now, this work, this purpose. Not what I'd planned, not what I'd imagined, but meaningful in ways I couldn't have predicted. Dad's death had been senseless and cruel, but through it, I'd found my calling. I helped people find answers. I fought for truth. I made sure that people who died in suspicious circumstances weren't forgotten, that their families weren't silenced, that justice could be found even years later. And every time I helped someone, every time we uncovered a truth that had been hidden, I thought of my father and the sacrifice he made for integrity. I thought of my grandfather and his 25-year quest for justice. I thought of that check at Christmas, the one everyone else thought was fake, the one that changed everything. I'd taken a piece of paper everyone dismissed and turned it into vindication, into truth, into justice. I'd honored the memory of a good man and held evil people accountable for their crimes. And in doing that, I'd become the person my father had hoped I'd be, someone who did the right thing even when it was hard, someone who chose truth over comfort, someone who believed that integrity mattered. That was his legacy to me, and I was determined to pass it on. The foundation grew, helping more families, finding more truth, shining light into more dark corners. And every case we solved, every family we helped find peace, was a testament to my father's belief that truth matters, that justice matters, that doing the right thing is always worth the cost. I'd started this journey with a check and a question. I ended it with a purpose and a promise to never let the truth be buried, to never let the powerful silence the vulnerable,
to never stop fighting for justice, no matter how long it took or how hard it got. That was my father's gift to me, the inheritance that really mattered. Not money, though that helped, not property or position or prestige, but the understanding that character is what you do when it's hard, when it costs you everything, when the easier path is right there in front of you. I'd chosen the hard path, and I'd walk it for the rest of my life. For Dad, for Grandpa, for everyone who deserved truth but had been given lies instead. That check at Christmas had been a test, a challenge, a call to action, and I'd answered it the only way that mattered, with courage, with determination, and with an unwavering commitment to truth. Justice had been served, evil had been punished, truth had prevailed. And somewhere, I liked to think, my father was proud of the daughter who'd refused to let his death be in vain, who'd fought for him long after everyone else had moved on, who'd kept the faith that truth and justice were worth fighting for. That was the real inheritance, the real gift, the knowledge that doing right matters, that truth can win, that justice is possible, even when it seems impossible. I carried that knowledge with me every day, and I used it to help others find their own justice, their own truth, their own path through grief to vindication. The story that started with a check nobody believed in ended with a life devoted to making sure other people's stories were heard, believed, and acted upon. And that, more than any verdict or sentence, was the victory my father would have wanted most. Quick question before you leave, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. Thank you for being part of this story time with me. I'll see you all again in the next video. Until then, stay strong, stay blessed, and keep shining.